What does it look like to grow as a multilingual church? Hey everyone, welcome back to another book review brought to you by our friends at Peniel Press, where good theology is good discipleship. Today I'm looking at Multilingual Church, Strategies for Making Disciples in All Languages by Jonathan Downie. I read through this book pretty quickly because I was so gripped by the idea, as our own church has been moving from monocultural to and monoethnic to multi-ethnic and multicultural. This is a growing edge for me as a pastor, and something that I'm thinking a lot about because we have 11 different languages represented in my church, but predominantly people do speak English. But what does it look like to have hospitality? What does it look like to minister and think through being a church where multiple languages are present? So if you're at any point on the journey of growing to being multilingual or multicultural, this book is going to challenge you, because it was at times really challenging and almost overwhelming, but also extremely helpful at the same time. So it starts with the need for and the biblical case for multilingualism. Beyond just sort of a Pentecost account, it draws from multiple other places in Scripture to show that this was part of the history in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament, and think about how the Bible's actually written in multiple languages before it's translated into one, say English, which is what I'm used to, or Spanish or any other language. It starts as being written in multiple languages. Then Jonathan Downie goes through kind of multiple approaches to having multiple languages. One approach is to do nothing. They're going to learn English anyway, as kind of the approach. And he says that this is a choice, and it's a choice that many churches make. And this highlights one of the most important and yet profound things that he's shared in the book. Is something I've kind of known intuitively, but as a translator, he shared that English speakers are most commonly those who struggle with creating space for other languages, because English is kind of the dominant trade language in the world. So we're used to being able to go places and have people operate in English. I know this as an American, and I go other places. It's sort of an embarrassment to travel because I only speak one language, and I know everyone else if I go to Europe, they all speak other languages, and I'm the only one who only speaks English. But many other people who are native English speakers have different kind of postures when they encounter other languages. And so him naming that not just as an American thing, but as something that's true of many English-speaking countries, he's coming out of the UK, that put a finger on something that I had not quite recognized exactly why that was happening. But it is true that in any culture, there's something about decentering the dominant language is how you grow to be multilingual, is one of the things that he talks about. Whether that is, here in Ontario, decentering English. It could be in Quebec, where my friends in Montreal, where they might need to decenter French. In some immigrant communities, the dominant language is part of that immigrant community's group, and there's a value to it, but there's also creating space for other languages as well, even within those communities. And so, he talks about the pros and cons of different approaches. There's the do nothing. They'll learn the dominant language anyway, which is a choice, and it's not a very hospitable choice. But he talks about, the pros and cons of having a separate service in each language, or to have, multiple languages in one service. Do you use AI? Do you use sort of in-house translators? Do you use professional translators? What are the benefits, drawbacks? What are kind of the costs versus the other costs, even if it's not financial, of doing some of these different approaches? And that was really a practical section, and that was really challenging because in our church, I incorporate some non-English songs and some non-English liturgy occasionally, but we still operate predominantly in English, even as a growing multicultural church. And when he's talking about kind of the far end of this journey, where there are churches that regularly have much of the service in different languages translated actively, it was humbling to see where we are on that journey. And I really liked that he didn't say that that the professional translators, which of course he is one, is the goal for every single church. That there are different places along the spectrum that are what God is actually calling us to do and to be. And so we need to be attentive to what God is calling us to, but maybe what is the next step? Like how I put it. Where is God calling you to step out of comfort into something new and that will help you to grow as a church and as a disciple of Jesus Christ? Another really important thing as he kind of goes through all these practical stuff is the need for a vision and strategy around multiple languages within one church, and to know what the strengths and weaknesses are of that and what are the challenges that are going to be presented by the particular strategy or approach that you have. And the other reason for a vision is that many churches view multilingualism as something that's necessary but not something desirable. So we'll have multiple languages until everybody learns English, and then we won't have to do this anymore. As opposed to saying this is actually what the Revelation 7 church is going to look like. This is actually a vision of the heavenly kingdom, and so we actually want this and desire this. Most churches will embrace this for a period of time, or until, because they want to be hospitable and they're talking about being hospitable but maybe struggling. If the people who are needing language services end up not staying, the church will just stop doing it because it's not necessary, because it only exists because it seems necessary at the moment, not because it's actually part of the vision and identity and calling of that church. And so true kind of multilingualism will be moving from the necessity of language services to a vision for this is part of what it means to be this church. Part of our calling in this church is to be a church for the nations. And so, really a fascinating book. I think the big takeaways for me were about decentering the dominant language. I had a bunch of conversations over the weekend about this book, and I find that that's true in different ways. I think about it for me as an English speaker. I was at a installation in Montreal where I was the only person who only spoke English. It's a Brazilian immigrant church, so they spoke Portuguese, they also spoke English, and they spoke French. And the other pastor who was there spoke English and French and Dutch, and the other elders spoke English and Portuguese, and I was the only one who just spoke English. And I thought about that because I was the one who needed to receive hospitality, because they all could keep talking in Portuguese, they could talk in French, they could have these conversations, and I was the one who was the limiting factor on our ability to worship together. And so it was an important moment for me, because that's when I was very clearly, to me as an English speaker, the guest. And I think that was a good experience. And I think for many of us who are part of the dominant language group within our culture or our country, being somewhere else where you are a linguistic guest is an important experience to learn the humility that's required to enter into a space of multilingualism within your own church. And so that decentering, whether that is English or whether you're, a Mandarin-speaking congregation that's the dominant language, and you want to be able to talk about how do we incorporate other languages, whatever it is, that decentering, not that you don't receive the gifts of the and use the dominant language, but that you receive the gifts of others as well, in that humility. And then, the second big takeaway for me is to do this not because you have to, but because it's part of the vision of the church. And so then it doesn't become a means to an end, a mean to assimilation into the dominant culture, or a means of just kindness until it's no longer necessary, but subtly communicating that we prefer that you be like us instead of you be who God has called you to be. And so those two things are huge takeaways. It's a very practical book, lots of really good questions, really hard questions that we might need to ask as churches who are on this journey. And so if you are interested in the book, I have a link in the description. It will help Jonathan Downie out if you buy the book. It'll be great for your church, but if you use the link that I have, it also helps me a little bit and helps support the work that we're doing here at Peniel Press. So God bless and see you next time.